Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something I know a lot of you are thinking about these days. Work-life balance.
Yeah, seems like everyone's trying to figure that out.
Right. And we got some pretty interesting sources to dig into today. Articles from the Independent and Business Matters magazine.
Oh, and we can't forget the folks over at LBC. They've got some interesting thoughts on this too.
Totally. But at the center of all of this is James Watt.
BrewDog co-founder.
Exactly. And he's got some pretty strong opinions about work-life balance. Or should I say, work-life integration.
He definitely does. He's really stirring the pot with his take on things.
Well, more like shaking up the whole keg, right?
Uh-huh, yeah. I mean, he basically said that the UK is one of the least work-oriented countries in the world.
And that it's hurting our productivity big time.
Right. He's not just throwing out opinions, though. He's got some stats to back it up.
Yeah, he's citing research from King's College London's Policy Institute. They looked at how central work is to people's identities in different countries.
And the UK didn't rank very high, did it?
Nope. Like way down there. Suggests that maybe work isn't as big a deal to us Brits compared to other folks around the globe.
Makes you wonder if that's connected to the whole productivity question.
Right. Especially when you look at the data Watt pulled from the Office for National Statistics, the UK's output per hour.
Seriously lagging behind France.
Which is ironic, right? Because France is kind of known for having a more laid-back work culture.
Yeah, you'd think it would be the other way around. But Watt also brings up analysis from the Institute for Fiscal Studies.
They're linking the UK's lack of growth
directly to those pesky productivity issues.
It's pretty fascinating stuff. But here's the thing. Watt isn't just some CEO preaching about work ethic. He's the head honcho at BrewDog.
A company that's had its own share of controversy.
Big time. Remember those culture of fear allegations that were flying around a while back?
Yeah, the Independent brought that up, didn't they?
They did. And Watt actually apologized for it.
Makes you think, huh. On one hand, you've got Watt promoting this work-life integration thing.
Where work is just part of your life, not separate from it.
But then you've got these past issues at his own company.
Right. So does a leader's personal philosophy excuse any potential workplace problems?
Especially when you consider that BrewDog later decided not to pay new recruits a real living wage.
Yeah. Business Matters reported on that one.
Definitely adds another layer to this whole thing.
Speaking of layers, let's bring in Georgia Toffolo.
Oh, right. The TV personality and Watt's fiance.
Exactly. LBC talked about how she's totally on board with the whole work-life integration philosophy.
Apparently they bond over their shared high-octane obsession with their careers.
Yeah, sounds intense. But you have to wonder, would Toffolo's view be different if she weren't dating the guy who champions this way of working?
That's a good question.
Oh, remember that Instagram post Watt made? The one that went totally viral.
The one where he said, work-life balance is irrelevant if you love your job.
That's the one. Well, he ended up deleting it after a whole bunch of strong reactions.
But then he reposted it later, even mentioning some pretty creative insults someone threw his way.
It was wild.
The whole thing really shows you how hard it is to have nuanced conversations online.
Especially on a topic like this.
Yeah, you get platforms like Instagram where people are just reacting instantly, often without really understanding the complexities of the issue.
It's like everyone wants to jump in with a hot take right away. But who's actually taking the time to think things through?
Right, and that's what we're here to do, unpack it all.
Exactly. So is this work-life integration thing just a fancy way of saying you're always on the clock?
Let's find out. That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, Watt's arguing that when you really love what you do, work doesn't feel like work.
Right. It just becomes this integrated part of your life.
But is that really realistic for most people?
It does sound kind of appealing. I mean, who wouldn't want to feel that way about their job? To be so passionate that it doesn't even feel like work.
I think it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that loving your work means you don't need boundaries anymore.
Yeah, I can see that.
Even if you're totally into what you do, you still need time to recharge.
Right.
Connect with people outside of work.
Yeah, and pursue other interests.
For sure. You don't want to become a one-dimensional person, even if your work is your passion.
It's like that old saying, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
Exactly. And that's where the integration idea gets a little tricky.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
It can so easily become an excuse for overworking, for blurring the lines until you're always on.
So how do we find that sweet spot then? If it's not just about loving your work, what does healthy work-life integration actually look like?
Well, it's going to be different for everyone.
Right.
But I think it starts with being honest with yourself about what you really need.
Right.
and what's important to you, what brings you joy and fulfillment, both inside and outside of work.
Makes sense.
And what boundaries do you need to protect your well-being, to avoid burnout?
It's like figuring out your own personal balance sheet,
Yeah,
seeing where you're spending your energy and making sure it aligns with what really matters to you.
exactly. It's about being intentional about how you structure both your work life and your personal life
Okay.
to support those priorities.
So maybe it means setting clear limits on work hours or being mindful of your tech use.
Right. Or carving out dedicated time for activities that bring you joy and help you recharge.
So it's less about finding a perfect 50-50 split between work and life and more about creating this dynamic flow that works for you.
I think that's a much more helpful and nuanced way to think about it. The ideal balance or integration is going to be different for everyone.
Of course.
It depends on your personality, your values, the demands of your job, your family situation. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Feels like custom tailoring your life to fit your own unique needs and aspirations.
It is, but it does take a good deal of self-awareness and honesty.
Yeah, I can see that being a challenge.
It can be.
This whole conversation makes me think about how much the nature of work is changing these days.
Yeah, for
The
sure.
traditional 9 to 5 just isn't as common anymore,
Yeah,
especially with more people working remotely
right.
and the whole gig economy thing.
You're absolutely right. The way we work is rapidly evolving, and that's definitely impacting how we think about work-life balance, or integration, as Watt calls it.
It seems like the lines are just getting blurrier.
They are, which makes it even more crucial to be intentional about how you manage your time and energy.
So if we're moving away from that traditional model of work, does that mean the whole idea of work-life balance is outdated?
That's a great question. I think the concept itself is still relevant,
Okay.
but it definitely needs a modern makeover. It's less about rigidly separating work and life and more about creating a rhythm that allows you to thrive in both.
I like that. A sustainable and fulfilling rhythm.
Yeah.
It feels so much more holistic than just striving for balance.
It does, and it acknowledges that this is an ongoing process, not a destination.
Right. It's not like you just achieve it and then you're done.
Exactly. It's about constantly checking in with yourself, reassessing your needs and priorities, and adjusting as needed.
Which means both individuals and employers need to be flexible and adaptable.
Absolutely. Companies have a huge role to play in all of this.
Yeah, it can't just be about individual responsibility
Right. They need to create cultures that support employee well-being,
and encourage healthy boundaries.
even as the demands of work become more fluid.
So we need to move away from that always-on mentality.
Yes. Towards a more human-centered approach.
One that values rest, rejuvenation, and personal fulfillment.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This brings us back to James Watt and how polarizing his views were.
Right. Some people were totally on board with his work-life integration philosophy.
While others were very critical of it.
I think that reaction really speaks to how complex this whole issue is.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer, no one-size-fits-all approach.
It all boils down to individual values and choices.
Exactly. But it's a conversation we need to be having.
Especially as the world of work keeps changing all around us.
For sure. We need to be having honest and open conversations about what a healthy and sustainable relationship with work really looks like in the 21st century. And that conversation needs to include everyone.
Yeah, individuals, employers, and society as a whole.
Mhm.
It's like we're all trying to figure out how to have it all right. A fulfilling career and a fulfilling life outside of work. But are those two things even compatible in today's world?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Like, we're told we should pour our hearts into our work and chase that next promotion, but also prioritize self-care and disconnect from the hustle.
It's kind of a recipe for inner turmoil, if you ask me.
Yeah, I can see that being pulled in opposite directions all the time.
So maybe this whole debate about work-life balance versus integration.
Is really just a symptom of a bigger problem.
Right.
It highlights this tension in our world. We're supposed to be passionate about our jobs, but also have this perfectly balanced life outside of work.
It's a lot to juggle.
It is. So maybe the real challenge is figuring out how to reconcile those two things.
In a way that feels real and sustainable. So where do we even begin? How do we start to untangle this mess? And find a way to work and live without feeling like we're always sacrificing one for the other?
I think it comes down to taking a long, hard look at ourselves
Okay.
and asking some tough questions. What truly matters to us?
Our core values.
Yeah, and how can we make choices that align with those values in both our work and our personal lives?
So it's about getting real with ourselves and figuring out what we're willing to compromise on
Yeah.
and what's absolutely non-negotiable.
Exactly. And that might mean making tough choices.
Like what?
Well, it could mean turning down that promotion that demands even more time at the office. It might mean setting boundaries with your boss or clients, or even prioritizing activities that bring you joy, even if it means saying no to other things.
It takes courage to make those kinds of choices, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Especially when we're constantly told to hustle harder and never give up.
it does. But I think it's also about recognizing that true success isn't just about climbing the corporate ladder.
Right, it's about more than that.
It's about creating a life that feels meaningful and fulfilling on multiple levels,
So maybe it's not about achieving perfect balance between work and life
but more about designing a life that feels integrated.
and aligned with who we are and what we value.
Exactly.
That sounds amazing. But I have to admit, it also sounds a little daunting. Where do we even start?
Start with small steps. Pay attention to how you feel throughout the day.
Okay,
When do you feel most energized and engaged? And when do you feel drained?
so become a detective of our own energy levels.
Exactly. Figure out what fuels you and what drains you. Then once you understand those patterns, you can start to make small changes.
Like what kinds of changes?
Well, maybe it's something as simple as taking a walk during your lunch break, or making sure you disconnect from technology for a few hours each evening. Or maybe it's something bigger, like renegotiating your work hours, or taking on a new project that's more aligned with your passions.
So it's about taking those small steps one at a time and gradually building towards a life that feels more aligned.
Precisely. And remember, there's no one right way to do this. What works for one person might not work for another.
So it's about experimenting,
Yes. And finding what feels right for you.
taking ownership of our lives, and creating a rhythm that feels both productive and fulfilling.
Well said. And don't forget, you don't have to do this alone. There are tons of resources out there. Books, articles, coaches, therapists.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
They can help you on this journey.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we?
We have.
We explored James Watt's controversial views, unpacked those interesting statistics, and thought about what it all means for the future of work and life.
We really dug into that tension between wanting meaningful work and needing rest and rejuvenation.
And we challenged ourselves to really think about what a truly integrated and fulfilling life could look like.
Mhm.
So as you go about your day, we'll leave you with one final question. Does the very idea of work-life balance need an update for today's world? And if so, what does a healthy integration of work and life look like for you?
Keep exploring these questions, keep experimenting, and keep striving to create a life that truly reflects your values and your dreams.
Until next time, keep diving deep.